Hi, I'm Ibi, and this is Kill the Cat. On today's episode, we're taking a look at the secret life of Walter Mitty and the common tongue of film language. We'll be spoiling some major plot points of the movie, so if you haven't seen it, this is your chance to avoid those spoilers. Otherwise, enjoy the podcast. To see things thousands of miles away, things hidden behind walls and within rooms, things dangerous to come to draw closer, to see and be amazed. That is the purpose of life. And that is the motto for Life magazine from The Secret Life of Walter and Mitty, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
So you chose this one?
Yeah. So initially when I chose this one, I actually chose it wanting to look at the cinematography in it. This film has struck me as just being a really beautiful film to look at. And I think there's a lot to go with there. But I think there's a lot to be said in sort of everything else in the film. I guess for me, the way I've kind of come to think about this film a little bit. So I'm not much of a reader. I have tried many times and I really struggle. I especially struggle with books that kind of are really heavy on the metaphor and heavy in sort of their language they use. So when I do come to reading, I really want books that use kind of a common tongue, I like to call it, and use a language that's easy to take on, easy to understand. Like, I still enjoy metaphor and still enjoy, like, you know, crafting your language well. But for me, I don't want to feel prohibited by the language that's being used. And I think there's something to be said with film. If you start looking at film as a language, as a way of communicating stories, which is what film is, one of my big struggles with like art house genre is that often the language is just more confusing than it is communicative, if that's a word.
It's a word, communicative.
Sure. But yeah, it's like if you start to forego a language that people have come to learn and understand just to favor your obscure metaphors, for me, you've kind of lost me. As a viewer, as an audience, my approach to storytelling, and I know this isn't everyone's approach, so I don't want to say it should be, but my approach is that I am telling a story and I want to make sure you leave having understood the message I've communicated. I want to tell a story with language that people understand. I want to use the common tongue, so to say. And that's the phrase I'm going to use for it.
Yeah, that's fair. And so I watched this for the first time for the podcast. Mm-hmm. Really liked it. I really like films like this. Films that aren't necessarily like great films or perfect films, but you can tell the thought and intention that's gone into it. So I saw like a few, I think last year. So a film for me, there's one that came out last year called Ready or Not. Comedy horror. It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Pretty funny. I wouldn't say it's a great, excellent movie. Yeah. But you could tell what they were doing and you could tell that so much care and preparation had gone into it. Or another one for me would be Us, Jordan Peele's second film. Yeah. So I reckon Get Out is about as close to a perfect screenplay as you can get. Us is not. But I can sense him trying so many things. And I came out of Us being like, that wasn't perfect, but I wish there was more movies like that. Yeah. I wish there was more space for movies like this to just try things and not have to be either this massive blockbuster or this Oscar darling, which I feel like are kind of the two films is budget for. Yeah, which is a shame. The other thought I had while watching this would be the kind of film you'd sort of watch in high school, introducing someone to film language. Yeah. For the sake of the podcast today, I think that's what we're going to be talking about, and we may veer and land somewhere else, and we'll see where the day takes us. Mm-hmm. But when I look at this film, I don't think I've found anything that lets it down. Like, I think this is a really good primer into the common language of filmmaking. When you look at the cinematography and the way it tells stories, I think the design works well. Like, they've made good choices in the design. Music, I really like the soundtrack. It's a fun soundtrack, and it's a soundtrack that fits the story. It does, yeah. And fits the style. And it's solid editing. Like, you know, again, just that like care put into everything, but in a way that's really easy to grasp. So I think maybe we go through, we talk about some of those specific elements, kind of what was working in them,
I really have come to like Ben Stiller as a director, probably more so than as an actor. I think he does a really solid job, and this movie for me is one that, it's one of my favorites because it's easy to watch and feels good.
It does feel good.
Yeah. So should we give people a primer if they haven't seen the movie?
Yeah.
Should we just tell them to stay away? If they
Look, obviously you're going to get more out of this if you've seen the film, and we're not avoiding spoilers at all. Bit of history. This was originally a short story by James Thurber. It was published in 1939 in The New Yorker. It's a couple of pages long. It's about the henpecked husband whose wife is bothering him, and his mind kind of drifts off into these absurd fantasies. That's it. It became quite famous. It was made into a musical comedy in 1947, which I couldn't find anywhere.
No.
Unfortunately.
We haven't been able to watch that, unfortunately, which is sad. It then became the 2013 film after what seems to have been a lot of development hell, a lot of changing hands of people. It kind of landed in the very caring hands of Ben Stiller, which I'm really glad about. But yeah, it's this film about a guy works in this job that he's been in for 16 years. He doesn't really have much going for him outside of that, just, going through the monotony of life. The film kind of beats him up a little bit for that, but there's actually quite a lot of redeeming characters in how he goes through life. Yeah,
it's more than just, here's a man stuck in a boring office job. And you find out later he had to look after his family from a very young age.
Yeah.
And you see that his sister can't sort out this piano for his mum who's moving. The first thing we see him do is balance a checkbook. And that's just such a wonderful character opener. Not on the computer, it's a pen and paper balancing his checkbook.
Yeah. And if you freeze the frame and read the things that he's balancing, it's really fun to look at the transaction. So there's some money spent for his mum's retirement home. There is the fine for Odessa, who is his sister, having skipped jury duty is one of the things he's paid for.
I missed that.
Yeah. He's paid $137 for an eHarmony account because he heard that this coworker he's interested in is on eHarmony. And then it's storage for this piano that his father had given to his mother, and is kind of a bit of a character representation that goes through the film.
Yeah, and they have to move her into a bigger apartment, right?
It kind of happens a little bit later, but they realize they can't get a piano into a 6th floor apartment.
Which was his sister's mistake, because his sister can't handle things and he has to, because that's his role in the family.
Yeah, one of the first interactions we actually see with the sister is she delivers a cake from his mum at his work where he's like, I'm late, I need to get into work. And she's like, oh, can you do the delivery instead? Because I need to go audition for Rizzo in this play.
That's right.
And he's like, what? No, you handle it. And we later find out it's not even a big production of Grease.
It's just an amateur.
It's some weird church, local production. But that's kind of the dynamic he's dealing with. So he's looking after his mum and this sister who's kind of not really got her life together.
And he likes his job. He's not just stuck at a computer doing numbers, I think, like we see in a lot of these films.
Yeah.
He has care. Well, not likes his job, but he has a lot of care for his job.
So he's a negative assets manager, which I love that name.
So boring, right?
And the way it's delivered in the film, it almost comes across as the adjective you manage the assets that are negative, rather than the noun, which it actually is. It's no, he manages the photograph negatives that come into Time and have come into Time magazine for many, many years. At one point he says close to 1 million negatives have passed through his hands and he has never lost one.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
There's that old story of a man coming across 3 men and they're chiseling granite blocks. And he asks the first man, what are you doing? He's like, I'm working on a granite block. He's like, okay. Goes to the next man. He's like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm working on a granite block that's 3 feet tall and 1 foot wide. He's like, okay. Goes to the third man. He's like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm building a cathedral. And it's just, how do you phrase what you're doing? Yeah,
and how do you see the purpose of your job?
So he begins the film, begins the story in what I put in my notes as the regular world. And the production design and the cinematography quickly establish what is regular world and what will come later.
Squares, blue, grey.
Pretty much.
That is basically it.
There's so many boxes. His computer is a box. An error message comes up. It's in a box. All the buildings look like boxes. There's a lot of front-on and side-on framing. We don't really get any three-quarter shots until the first fantasy sequence, which does come in quite early.
Yeah. And so that's actually something we didn't mention, but part of this character is that to escape from his world, he will jump into these like fantasy sequences. I think there's 8 total that he goes through over the course of the film, and they are quite fantastic. They're a lot of fun. The very first one we see is he's at the train station. He's talking to Todd, who is the guy from eHarmony who's helping him set up his account because he hasn't been anywhere or done anything noteworthy. Suddenly he kind of like looks behind him and puts the phone down, and we start to get our first like three-quarter shots and things that are slightly different. And then he jumps off of like this raised train platform because he's in New York City, so it's the above the street train lines. And he like jumps to this building across the road, bursts through the window. Suddenly it cranes down to like the entrance and everyone is running, and he's like, get out, it's gonna blow. And then the building just explodes, and he's got Cheryl, who's the love interest's 3-legged dog, and he hands it to her, and she's like, oh my God, thank you, you're so noteworthy and interesting. And he's like, thanks, I just engineered this prosthesis for your dog's leg. Then it cuts back and it's Todd trying to get through to him, still on the other end of the phone, and he's missed his train. It's these kind of things where he zones out. One of the things I love about the zone outs is that almost the entire adventure happens because of a zone out. And it's this little bit of dialogue that his mum talks about. So, quick summary. There's a set of negatives delivered by this photographer who still shoots on film. One of them is missing, and it's the one that the photographer is like, hey, this is the one you should use for your cover.
The quintessence of life.
The quintessence of life. And Walter's like, where's this negative? Why isn't it with the others? And he has to go on this whole adventure to try and find the photographer, but he's only got like little clues because the photographer is like kind of lives nowhere and has no fixed address or anything. When they send his pay slips, they send it to like 3 different places, and it's kind of like it'll eventually get to him. But at the end, he realizes that the photographer had been at his house and had been talking to his mum, and he's just gone to like Greenland and Iceland to try and find this guy. And it's like his mum had a conversation with him, and she's like, yeah, I told you about this the other day. And she's like, oh no, you were like zoned out.
Yeah.
I love things like that in this film. There's a whole lot of little things that kind of just all the dots add up.
Yeah, like when he gets 3 clues.
Mm-hmm.
They're photos of things. They're a thumb, some water, and a random curved object he can't identify.
With a slight chip in it.
With a slight chip in it.
Yeah.
And all 3 clues are curved things. Because he's going on his adventure now. So he's going to break away from his grey and blue straight line boxes, and we're going to start getting greens and golds and curves and circles.
Yeah.
Film language 101.
There's this great scene where he sort of looks to a photo on the wall, and like the photographer that they're trying to find beckons him forth. And so he leaves and he runs past all these big like Life magazine covers, and then it's this brilliant photography which is really reminiscent of a lot of, I guess, magazine spreads. Each of them could be like a double-page magazine spread advertisement, which again, film language 101, right? It's a image that relates to the story that you're telling. It relates to the world, right? We're talking about a guy who works with magazines, so let's use magazines to influence the way we shoot the film. My initial title for this podcast was How to Shoot Like a Photographer.
Yeah, and that's what I went in watching the film thinking about as well, which makes sense. It's the whole thing's about a photograph. He works at a photography magazine.
Yeah, when you get to Greenland, especially the cinematography just opens right up, and it's these beautiful landscapes, and you know the location is stunning and gorgeous, so you can't really take a bad photo. And you really start to see, I guess for me, where a lot of the reference photography comes from. So Life magazine was a real magazine. It was a part of Time magazine. It got shut down, I want to say in the early 2000s. I should have this written down, but I don't. But the archives still exist. So you can go to the Life magazine website if you Google it, and you can actually look through a lot of the photography from those magazines. It sort of, for me, what this frames in the film are reminiscent of is a lot of documentary and like sort of older lifestyle photography, like photojournalism. And, you know, it's all stuff you would have seen in Life magazine back in the day, or maybe in like National Geographic, those kind of things. I think that is really playing into the story. And so, you know, that's things like using wide lenses and getting close to your subject. You know, when I look through some of the photography books I've got, right, everything is so close to your subject rather than being far away and kind of using your long lenses. You know, it's grainy. They're using a film stock that really works for the images. The cinematographer really just nailed that in my books.
I even remember, I saw the trailer for this when it came out, but didn't actually see the movie. And
So-
I remember the shot of him running past all the posters.
Yeah.
Because it's so beautiful. And like, I never forgot that one shot.
Yeah.
And then finally seeing the movie all these years later, get some context for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to the idea of this being common tongue of film language, obviously, if you're a low-budget filmmaker or a student filmmaker, you can't make a massive office block. But there are little things like this you can do. For example, in the hair and makeup, everything is grey and square, and then we meet Odessa, Walt's sister, for the first time. She's got a side ponytail. She's in like a skirt.
She has these pink, like those cat, what are they called? Like the pointy sunglasses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's holding a circular cake. She's all curves and colours.
Mm-hmm.
And you immediately know, okay, she's from a different world.
Yeah. And she is, you know, the quirky, weird, artsy sister.
Yes. What was the quote about his mother gives them about her kids?
When they're, this moment where they're going through a box that the mother has of all Walter's old stuff. And they find like photos of him when he went to work at Papa John's, which was like immediately after his father passed away. And that's kind of his backstory, is that his father passed away and he's gone into just working. Like within 2 days, he'd gotten a haircut and gone to work, and he'd just worked since. But one of the phrases that his mother uses is, "Oh, here's my little worker bee and here's my little performance artist bee." And it's kind of, it's really, for me, I really like that line because it's just real clear defining character kind of stuff. Like something I was taught when I did screenwriting at film school was one of the best ways to tell your audience about your character is to have another character say something about that character, because suddenly we can believe it and it's not as direct as a character talking about themselves, because that's just never fun.
Yes. How long have we been brothers? Remind me.
They should never be that self-aware.
Yeah, and then we meet Cheryl, the love interest. Mm-hmm. Even when we kind of meet her through eHarmony. So I've never been on eHarmony. I don't know if it's still around. Maybe it is.
I think it is.
I think it's just been overtaken. But the thing Walter has to do is send a wink to be like, it's like matching on Tinder, I guess. And the wink is round. And it's the first circle we see in the film. And then when we meet her, she's not wearing grey. She's wearing a long necklace that's a curve. She's not quite as out there as Odessa, but she's wearing a polka dot shirt. Her hair is wavy.
Yeah.
And we kind of see colour start to enter Walter's life. They go for a walk. Yellow taxis are suddenly in the shot.
Yeah, green of, I want to say Central Park. Are they in Central Park? It's a park in New York. That's just Central Park, right?
Of course. Every park in New York is Central Park.
Is Central Park.
Yeah, it's the first time we see green. Mm-hmm. First time we see what Walter could be is that skateboard shot.
Yeah, definitely. Was Ben Stiller performing those tricks?
Of course. It makes me think of there's a scene in Brooklyn Nine-Nine where Gina's doing her big goodbye and she gets like a stunt double to do flips up the room, and then they like hide behind the whiteboard. She's like, "That was great." She comes out and she goes, "I was perfect."
And on the makeup, and you know, there's the very obvious thing of like Ben Stiller, he has a beard when he's gone on his adventures. When he jumps into the ocean, all his clothes get soaked, and so he gets given like a sort of like a pullover and just some jeans. And even his bag, he's gone from a briefcase to this like super hipster like bag with like a rope tie at the end.
Gone from a square to a circle.
Yeah. And so it's these costume choices that are telling us the story about a filmmaker. And nothing we're going to talk about here is complex stuff, but it's stuff that when you get it all done, it just feels right, like it works. And it's the kind of stuff that I think when I see films that don't get it right, I just get frustrated because I'm like, wait, what? Why is it like, this is a film that could have been done with your standard, every scene, you know, here's a master shot, here's a shot of a close-up of this person, here's a shot of the close-up of this person, we cut between them as they talk, master shot to lead out, master shot of the next scene.
It's how a lot of filmmakers are taught, unfortunately. Yeah. Which is right, it's like a good way to learn.
And there are scenes that do this, but it goes to another level when you go, what's the best cinematography to tell this story? Oh, it's cinematography inspired by National Geographic and by Life magazine and by documentary and photojournalism, things that look like magazine spreads. That's where we're going to really elicit the emotion we're looking for in the story. And yeah, costume is another one.
Student film, indie films, well, especially student films, costume and makeup just gets overlooked all the time. I think a lot of, and this is fine for some things, but I think a lot of time it's just what the actor was brought with them on the day. There's a friend I know who is an actor. They have like a standard outfit for if they get told to come with their own clothes or just what you'd wear on a standard day. And it's like any film they've been told to wear that in, it's the same outfit. Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is a little bit funny.
By the way, screenwriters, you can put this on the page. I actually think this is some of the best ways to introduce a character. It's things that a director or a production designer or a costumer can take and make real. So instead of saying, here's Walter Mitty, he's an office worker who daydreams about his life, you can say things like, here's Walter Mitty. Actually, this is one of my favorite things I've actually ever read in the screenplay. Here we go. During the morning rush hour, a crowd of businessmen wait on the corner to cross the street. Walter is among them, dressed in a short-sleeved business shirt and tie with a briefcase in hand. So, props, costumes. Nothing happens. Then Walter's head explodes. Credits begin. Up towards the clouds propelled skyward are the contents, ideas and images of his mind. It's the kind of thing we're taught not to put on the page, but it's just such a wonderful summary of how the film feels and where I think a lot of the cinematography come from. And when they say when Walter head explodes, that's the first fantasy sequence.
Yeah, and this scene doesn't happen in the movie and becomes the scene on the train station where he then jumps into the other building, but it's the screenwriter giving cues to the director about who this character is. I find there's a kind of a weird balance you have to strike as a screenwriter. You know, you don't want to be directing the film for the director, but at the same time, if you have something that's going to give to the character and can introduce it in a way that isn't prescriptive, I think, yeah, go for it. Add that in. That's helpful. And it can be got rid of.
Yeah, it's giving a sense of what your story is, and it's good to come to story and not come at it saying, this is just a blueprint, I don't have to worry about the finished film. It's good to think like, okay, he's in an office, this is boxes, this is square lines, there's greys, there's blues. And then later thinking about there's going to be open landscapes, there's going to be mountains, he's going to be dressed this way, he's going to have a beard. Like, it's worth thinking about that stuff
as a writer,
on the page.
As a writer, you set the locations. You know, you say an office. Sure, the production design team will be building that office if you're on a big budget movie, or your locations team is finding you an office if you're on a smaller budget. But you've still defined, we're in an office with cubicles, or are we outside? Like, you still have the capacity as a writer to give us settings that tell us something about the characters. You know, a lot of Walter and Cheryl's interactions, barring the first one where they first meet and the fantasy he has with her when he's the sexy Latina ice climber, a lot of their interactions are in parks. Like when they have their main conversation, the first one about needing to find Sean O'Connell, she's got to go pick up her son. So suddenly there's a character reason to get out of the office for this scene between two people who will later become romantically involved.
Yes, and the idea of them growing closer brings in the colour, brings in the nature. Maybe some people are listening saying, like, I know all this, like, I know all of this. Like you said, common tongue, film 101, but there's a reason we chose this film for this purpose, and it's that they take all of this to communicate story and character, but also theme, which we started with and we can come back to now and talk about what this movie's trying to say through making all these choices.
Yeah, there's a quote from Ben Stiller talking about Walter Mitty, is that he's an analog man in a digital world. I really love that quote to define the movie, and I think it's this weird mix of Walter goes on a journey that doesn't feel like a digital journey. It feels like him really coming to the fullness of like the analog world, and something that's been lost in our sort of move to the digital age, and the whole life being shut down and becoming an online thing, and the whole downsizing and destruction of what life was.
Yes, that's so on the nose. I don't mind it, but it's so on the nose. Like life is literally going digital. The magazine life is going digital.
Yeah. Adam Scott's character is both brilliant and
I love
ridiculous.
Adam Scott.
That beard. Just
maybe one costuming choice that didn't quite work.
Yeah. I still don't know if it worked or not. Like there's part of me that's like, oh, that beard, I hate this guy. That's
true. Is it because Ben Stiller gets a big beard at the end, but it's like a genuine beard, as opposed to like this fake guy?
Yeah, maybe. Look, that's a thing.
And it looks better on him.
You know, and there is the fact that like at the end there's this great moment where Walter delivers the quintessence of life and asks Adam Scott's character, do you actually know the motto of life? And he doesn't. He's like, I don't know, life, I'm loving it. Like, no, that's McDonald's. And you just get like this guy who has been the big dog, who's the guy who's in control, doesn't actually get life. And Walter Mitty is the guy who has and does.
Yeah, and the whole thing is about Walter Mitty's search for the quintessence of life, both metaphorically and literally. It's what the photograph he's missing is referred to by its photographer. And the idea in looking for life, he has to leave the office, leave the boxes, leave the grey. He has to go out into the wild, explore, get out of his own head.
Yeah.
There's even a lovely quote from Todd. He gets to meet Todd from eHarmony in person. And Todd says, "You're not how I pictured you. I pictured you as a little grey piece of paper, but now I see you." And I thought that's just such a wonderful summary of you used to be. And I think that's even more relevant now than when the movie came out. We can be reduced to our digital footprint and who we are online. And that's not life. Life is who we are in person. I really actually appreciated a lot of little lines of dialogue from this film. The kinds I would pull to use in an English essay. Like even one at the end where Walter's telling Cheryl about Odessa auditioning for Rizzo.
Yeah.
And Cheryl's response is, "I always related to Rizzo more. She was real, I guess."
Yeah.
Just little touches.
One of the lines I really like is when Walter finds Sean finally, and they're watching a snow leopard, and one of the lines Sean says is, "Beautiful things don't ask for attention."
Yeah, I love that one.
And when Walter asks what was the picture of, Sean just says, "Let's just call it a ghost cat," which is this thing, because the snow leopard is this beautiful thing, but it's called the ghost cat because it never shows itself. And it's this beautiful thing that never asks for attention. And Walter is in the final photo. Spoilers for the whole film. He's the ghost cat, and it's like this. He's the beautiful thing that has never asked for attention and has finally actually been able to kind of become the full beautiful self, if you will.
And when you think of his fantasies, it's always like the first one, he wants acknowledgement from his crush.
Yeah.
He literally wants to be told you're noteworthy. And there's this interesting message of once you stop trying to be noteworthy, you become noteworthy.
Yeah.
And going back to that moment with the snow leopard, Sean does not even take the photo. And what he says is, "If I like a moment, I don't like to have the distraction of the camera." And that's just such a wonderful way of saying everything in the beginning is in boxes, it's in frames, it's straight lines, as though framed by a camera.
Yeah.
And he takes the camera away in the end and says, "I just want to enjoy this moment."
I think I've found that as a photographer, is getting, is that real thing. I think that's an important thing as an artist. I think to just remember is like not getting so caught up in what you're creating that you forget to just enjoy life. And, that's the true inspiration.
Enjoy the work, enjoy the art.
Yeah.
I think
enjoy the inspiration
enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Or even we were just talking before we started, we play D&D and we are DM for each other's game. And it's kind of this wonderful thing about being a DM where you get Dungeon Master or Game Master, where you write something and you're writing it for, 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And you come and you show them what you've done and they collaborate and they love it and they get a kick out of it and it's over. And you'll probably never use that piece of writing again, but it was wonderful.
Yeah. It's like this impermanent art that exists for a handful of friends for a small handful of hours one Wednesday night in Sydney. I really love this movie as an artist.
Yeah.
It speaks to me on a thematic level, and I think it's just really effective in its message.
I actually thought going towards the end that the photograph was lost. I thought that was going to be the ending, and I was actually okay with that. Because I was kind of had this idea of like whatever they put in the photograph can't top what's in your head. And they do. So like we said before, the final photograph is Walter Mitty being unobserved and Sean has taken a photo of him.
Sean has been able to see who Walter Mitty is for a very long time. It's set up and established that Walter is like the only person that Sean talks to at time. He, beyond the people who pay him. And he says, you've always looked after my work and like gotten it through how I've needed it to be seen, right? Like Walter has always been the perfect conduit for Sean's work to get onto those cover photos and throughout the magazine. And this guy is the guy who's been able to see Walter, and he's the photographer. He's the one who he is the ideal self for Walter that Walter is chasing, right? He's the adventurous guy who lives on the edge and he's the completely analog guy, right?
Completely. I think he even like writes letters. There's no digital communication.
So at the beginning, he sends a message to the like CEOs and he's sent it by actual telegram, and like there's this really old man walking through the office like trying to find his way out as they're having a staff meeting. I think that leads to this idea of like Walter never steps into the digital world to become better. He never becomes a digital man. He just becomes a more fulfilled analog man.
I don't think we've actually mentioned this, but the photo, the quintessence of life, Walter has it the entire time.
Yeah, it's in a wallet.
That Sean gives him, and he gets the wallet, and it's got that lovely quote from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Again, very on the nose metaphor, to look inside to find the quintessence of life, which he doesn't do until the end. Yeah. And realizes it's in the wallet.
An aside, I love the interaction between Sean and Walter. Is like, what did you do with it? It kind of hurts, man.
Just threw his wallet out. Doesn't he also have a line of like, you shouldn't have done that? It's very sweet, but it's a very important document. I kind of liked that they addressed that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, it's kind of nice when they address like a...
Oh, convenience.
Convenience, yeah. That's a good word.
I think the movie is aware of what it is. I think the movie is aware that it is fairly on the nose, that it's fairly light in its metaphor. And I think I have this belief that like there's a certain point, like you write a script, you go and make it, and then you get into the editing room, and actually there's a point, and I think there's points along each of those stages, but there's points where the film starts telling you what it wants to be. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, like I think it happens in the script stage, right?
Oh, definitely.
Like oh no, it's telling me it's something else. And if you fight that, I always find the script is so much worse for it.
Yeah, I'm currently writing a feature, and I was nearing the end of my second draft, and it wasn't really working. It was kind of working. And then it was basically like, you have to change everything about this to make it this other thing and kill most of it. And it's so much work, but my brain just went, yes, that is correct. Yeah. Even though I'm like, that really hurts. I'm essentially throwing away 2 drafts, but I'm like, no, this is what it wants to be.
Yeah, when you let a film be what it wants to be, even if it's not super deep kind of film, even if it's hitting your basic like levels of technicality, it can still be something really brilliant.
And it can still speak to people.
I think this movie speaks to so many people. I'm always surprised when I look at the critical reception, because the critical reception was pretty, like when you look at critic scores, they're at like 50%. And when you look
Yeah.
at audience scores, they're at like 80% for this movie. And the critical reception never seems to be anything technical. Occasionally it's a performance thing, but mostly it's just, oh, this film is too shallow. But then when you look at the people who are responding, like from audience scores, they're all saying, actually, this spoke to me and I really received something out of this. And I think it's that thing coming back to the common tongue, right? Like,
Yeah.
your film can be so effective in the common tongue, and sometimes it's maybe better to just speak the common tongue than to try and
Break all the rules.
break the rules and like try to expand the film language. And you know, there is a place for expanding the film language. So many films have noteworthy things that have, you know, Star Wars, the original film's not that great, but they expanded the film language a lot with what they did with visual effects and
Great characters.
Yeah,
I
like
mean, that's
the
why we remember them, really.
yeah, like the sci-fi genre has changed forever because of that film. But when you look at like some of the performances, not great. Cinematography, pretty average.
Still love Star Wars, don't hate us. But
No.
also, I watched all of Star Wars as an adult, which
Yeah.
is an experience very different, I would say, to
Yeah.
watching as a kid. If you're a first-time filmmaker, first-time screenwriter, especially in film school, it is tempting to say, I want to do something bold, I want to do something different. But it is important to learn the rules before you break them. And it's good to make films like this that you could break down in a high school classroom and be like, here's the symbolism, here's the metaphor, here's how they use production design, here's how they use the color palette. And that's not an insult. Like, we looked at great films in high school. Like, we did Pan's Labyrinth. Similar, actually, take to this. There's a fantasy world and there's a real world. The real world is blue. The fantasy world is green. The real world is straight. The fantasy world is swirls and curves.
Yeah, and I'm reluctant to say, you know, don't break the rules, because the rules doesn't mean a master shot and a close-up of each character who talks and a close-up of anything, you know, important that they give to the other character. Like, that's real boring. But actually sticking within the rules can mean, you know, doing adventurous things as well, and doing things that relate to the story and the subject matter and the theme. This office worker Walter character being able to skateboard would be pretty against the archetype, right? Would be a pretty broken rule if you were to say, no, he's a character who would never ride a skateboard. But actually, it serves a lot of the story and tells us a lot about who he was, and kind of gives us a lot of like, oh wow, this thing where his dad passed away and he had to go straight to work was this really big, impactful moment. And we start to see that actually Walter almost didn't get a say in sort of where he ended up. He's kind of just had to go there for a very noble reason of like trying to support his family. But there is still this hope of him being the edgy skateboarder kid with a mohawk, right?
Where those fantasies come from. I think that's actually like such a relatable thing. I don't think any of us really want to end up in an office job, but we do, and we all have our reasons for being there. And we all fantasize about stuff.
Yeah.
Of course we do. We all want to be noteworthy. If you're a filmmaker, you're probably fantasizing about stuff all the time. That's kind of what we do. We think about, you know, the next movie we want to make and how we would get there and what we could do if we had unlimited budgets and how we would shoot it. Like, we're always thinking about this kind of stuff, right?
Totally.
I think it's fine to break the rules, but do it because your script or your movie is telling you to do it. Don't do it for the sake of doing it. It's that gut feeling, because I break the rules when I write, but at this point, it's because it's what the script wants it to be, not because I'm doing it for the sake of doing it. Yeah.
I think you said something just before we started recording. This film feels like it found really caring hands to
really did.
create
and
it.
If you look at any interviews with Ben Stiller, you can tell how much he just cares so much about this film. And I think you can tell, we're talking about like art house films versus kind of more straightforward films. I think you can tell when you walk into a slightly weirder film, when a filmmaker is trying to be edgy or trying to break rules, and you can tell when it's something personal that they really care about.
Yeah.
And when it's something you care about that's coming from the heart, and that's obviously quite a cliche piece of advice, like write what you know, write what you care about. But you can tell You can feel it on the screen.
Yeah. I think for me, common language is something I really want to keep investigating. And I think this film gives a great intro to how to speak common language. Study the editing, study the cinematography, study the production design, really trying to find each element that can help you nail what your one big idea is the thing that you should take away from this film.
Absolutely. So, until next week, go and find the quintessence of life. No. If he's shaking his head, he says no to that ending.
No, it's not what
it doesn't feel
it's
right.
not what the podcast wants to be.